sort of fit together. Whenever there are discharges in algae, there becomes a very singular focus on water management and on this issue. So let's talk for a few minutes about that. We recognize that there is a great chasm between the public's anxiety and anger about this issue and the public's perception about what the agencies are doing. So what do I mean by that? I know you're angry. I know you're disappointed. I think you feel like the agencies aren't doing enough, that the federal government isn't doing enough, that the state agencies aren't doing enough, and you're fed up with it.
Yes.
So, thank you for that. So I know that, and I want to be part of the solution. So I think there's 4 components, and it all has to do with better communication, but it also comes about making some tough choices. And I think we're all a part of those tough choices. So the first thing is that I think we take the flood control component for granted. So I want to show you a couple of slides. The CNSF system was authorized in large part because of what happened in 1947. All of the blue on this slide is the flooding that occurred in 1947. In 2017, we had more rain than this. In May, we had more rain than this. We didn't have this kind of flooding. And it's because we have a flood control system that works for flood control. In 1947, some of the places that are in blue on this map were underwater for over 6 months. That doesn't happen today. The flood control system that we built based on the 1948 authorization was designed to provide flood protection for 2 million people. We have over 8 million people. Every acre of land that we turn into development is someplace where that water can't stay, where nature designed for the water to sit on the landscape, but we need it to run off in order to provide flood protection for the people that live and work there. So the flood control system works, and I'm glad that the public takes it for granted, because that means that that part of our job that we, the federal government, and that the state government do for the public is working. Now, what isn't working so well? What isn't working is the environmental impacts of this flood control system. So the SERP authorization that helps us look at how do we do flood control in a way that is more compatible with the natural environment is the hard part. And so I want to talk a little bit about water management, but first I think I'm going to go back. I have to tell you, this has been a really busy week for us. We have folks up in DC that are talking, so Colonel Kirk is up talking with members all week long. He met with the River Kids, which he said was a great and excellent experience for him. He is meeting with our members in order to help them understand this issue. We are doing public meetings across the state this week. Monday, we were with the Brighton Reservation in order to talk about the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project. Tuesday, we were in Fort Myers to talk about the EAA Reservoir Project that the South Florida Water Management District completed that study. Lewiston, we did the same presentation about Lake Okeechobee, the EAA Reservoir Project tonight. We're here in Stewart, which was designed because I was presenting here with you guys this morning, and so we scheduled the public meeting tonight on purpose because of that. And then we have another series of meetings about the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Project. But the reason I bring that up is we had developed a presentation about 2 weeks ago that I was going to give to you guys today, and John Campbell and I threw that in the garbage yesterday and said I wanted to talk to you about the issues that I think are most important to you, and then not just give you an update on the projects that we're doing. So forgive me if the presentation doesn't flow as naturally maybe as a scripted one would, but I think it's important for us to have that conversation. So I mentioned that I think that there's 4 components to solving this problem. So I think the second one is remembering that water is the world's most important resource. Fresh water is the world's most important resource. It's a precious resource that Mother Nature gives us lots of here in South Florida. What we've done is decided to limit where that water can be stored on the natural environment. And that's okay. And we have the technologies to figure out what to do about that. But I think we have to recognize that it's not just easy or simple to make it go away. Because ultimately, I don't think we want it to go away. We all recognize that our ecosystems here in South Florida need that fresh water. So how do we get that fresh water in the right places at the right times? And that's part of what the Central and Comprehensive Everglades plans are all about. So the third component is that these solutions take sacrifice. They take sacrifice in terms of our money, in terms of our time, and in terms of our choices. It's not just taxpayer money, although that's a big part of it. It's also personal funds. It's appropriations at local, state, and federal levels. It's donations to educational institutions, to nonprofit organizations, to grant money, all of those things. And they're all an important piece. And nobody has enough of it. And so working together in order to apply the funding is important. But every one of those requires choices. Every one of those requires choices, because every time we dedicate money to something to solve this problem, that's money that we're not dedicating to something else that's important to us, to education, to healthcare, to roads, to other important issues that also have big problems and need big solutions. And so those are tough choices. It's not easy to figure that out. And sometimes the people who are making those choices are making the choices without perfect information. And so part of our job is to help make sure that they have the information that they need to weigh those choices well, and to hear your voices about what's important to you as they make those choices. And fourth, and probably the hardest one, is that I think the solution requires some lifestyle changes. And that's for each one of us. Because again, this flood control system was designed for 2 million people. We have 8 million people in South Florida now. And every one of us make choices every day about what kind of fertilizers we use, where we're putting our trash, what plants we're putting in our yards, who we're endorsing, what companies we're endorsing, what products we're using. All of those choices are important. And because of that, we each have a piece of this solution. So with that backdrop or context, I want to talk about our water management. So first I want to give you maybe a little bit of good news. John, can I share good news yet? Are we close enough to, where are you? Oh, are we close enough to release that I can?
Yes.
Okay. So we make our water management decision every week. We usually make our decision on Wednesday afternoons. On Thursday, we make phone calls to elected officials in the morning, and we issue a press release, usually by noon, on Thursday mornings. Our decisions these past couple weeks have been really difficult because we can't fix the algae problem. As I mentioned, this is something that has to do with lifestyle choices, money choices, big choices that have been made for the past 20 years and are affecting our environment today. The algae is not unique to Lake Okeechobee. You find blue-green algae all across the nation. The Corps and other state and federal agencies are combating this problem in about 25 states across the nation. Algae grows in many water bodies where there is warm, stagnant water that has high nutrient levels. Where do the nutrients come from? A variety of sources of runoff from urban, agricultural, and other sources that are a big deal and they collect in our water bodies. The Corps of Engineers isn't responsible for water quality, and that is a responsibility in Florida, that's a responsibility of the state, and across the nation it's a responsibility of the states, and not all the states do it the same way. So that complicates things for federal agencies because we have to work with individual states on how do we solve these problems. But we are working with our state agencies and with other federal, state, and independent organizations in order to not just do the science and not take 10 or 20 years, but what can we do in incremental solutions over time. So back to our release decision. So we will be announcing in a press release that's going out shortly today that we are going to take a pause on our releases from Lake Okeechobee for about 1 year. So 9 days of no releases. After that, we will start a pulse release. I'll tell you, I'm concerned about how the Caloosahatchee reacts to this, so I've talked to them about it, because I don't want them to think that the estuaries have to fight against each other. Because they're very concerned about, they have more capacity on the west side. They get more water on the west side than you guys do on the east side. So we need to work together. And the city of Sanibel assured me that the estuaries work together and they support the pause on the east side. And so what we're looking at is we're also going to do a pulse release on their side, hoping to stratify some of the algae in the Caloosahatchee River and see if that makes an impact. We're trying some things that we don't know. We don't know whether it's going to make a difference or not. So we're collecting a lot of data, and we appreciate the support from many organizations that are helping us collect data so that we can adaptively manage this system to benefit everyone who lives in this area. So these are hard choices, and they're not perfect solutions, but we're doing what we can. So that's our release decision. Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain to me how what you designed for non-flooding affects the natural draw and produces the algae, how they work together? Just describe to me, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding why that one causes the other.
So the system brings all of the water runoff from all of the developed areas, so whether those are where people live or agriculture businesses, all of that runoff that is nutrient laden goes into our canals of the flood control system. And north of Lake Okeechobee, all of that water flows into Lake Okeechobee. That water flows in at a rate 4 to 6 times the rainfall amount. So if you get 3 inches of rainfall north of Lake Okeechobee, the lake will rise about 12 inches. so it's very quick. We don't have the capacity, east, west, and south, to get rid of the water out of Lake Okeechobee as quickly as it can come in. For two reasons. One, because of that amount, because it's a very large basin, and there's a lot of runoff that goes into Lake Okeechobee. And the second reason is because as soon as when you're getting that rain in Lake Okeechobee, it's usually also raining south of Lake Okeechobee and east and west of Lake Okeechobee. So all of those canals where the water could go from the lake is already full and wet from the rainfall that's occurring. And so we have to wait until there's capacity in those canals in order to be able to move additional water south.
Can we hold questions until, we may get some answers here and then right at the end.
I was looking to see, I guess I didn't put that slide in here, but I thought I did, but I didn't.
So once you conclude, we'll have some interaction, okay? So we'll-
Okay, that's a great question though, and it's good context. So let me talk just for a couple minutes about how we make our decisions so that you can understand where this comes from, and I'll give you some, hopefully a little bit of idea of why the lake is so challenging. So this blue line is last year. This is Hurricane Irma. That's how quickly the lake rises. So down here is the dates. So you can see in just a matter of about 3.5 weeks, the lake went from 13.5 to 17.5. That's what makes us worried when we're where we are today. So this blue is today, this is this year. So this is where we are today, 14.11 feet. Here's where we were when Hurricane Irma hit. Here's where we are today. And they're predicting maybe up to 4 major hurricanes this year. What happens when one of those goes over South Florida? We go up here. What we've seen at Herbert Hoover Dike is that above 17.5, we start to see seepage problems that are indicative of issues with the dike. So when, I don't want to get into too technical information because it's probably not that meaningful, but we start to see problems where you see material moving through the dike, and that's indicative of what we see when you start to have failure modes. In the past, at 18.5 is where we started having real problems and had to go into active prevention, taking pretty drastic and serious measures in order to prevent any kind of failure on portions of the dike. So it makes us real nervous when we start to have levels, that are in this range, and we still have hurricane season upon us, because we know how quickly the lake can rise. Other impacts that I wanted to share with you from Hurricane Irma, because that's recent and everybody can appreciate and understand that. Another component of why the lake rising is so important is because it doesn't become a static pool under hurricane and other storm events. Lake Okeechobee is large enough that it gets what you might understand as tidal surge. So when we have a hurricane, you know how you get the tidal surge effect on the coast. Lake Okeechobee creates the same kind of phenomenon. So Hurricane Irma was not a huge wind event, but on Lake Okeechobee during Hurricane Irma, there was a 10-foot differential between one side of the lake and the other side of the lake. And that was a pretty minor wind event for a hurricane. So an even larger, more significant wind event hurricane could have an even larger surge effect. All of that water then pushes on one side of the lake. And we don't always know, as the hurricane's approaching, which side of the lake it's going to push onto. So again, it's something that we are armoring the Herbert Hoover dike against this. This is why we're rehabilitating the dike. This is why we're doing the fixes. This is why we're spending $1.8 billion on fixes on the Herbert Hoover dike, is to make sure that that dike is safe for the people who live and work around the lake and face this every time we have a wind event that goes over Lake Okeechobee. We also saw in Hurricane Irma some of our projects working fantastically. The dike worked fantastically, right? We didn't have any overtopping of the dike. We didn't have flooding because a part of the dike failed or performed improperly. It worked. Another thing that worked is the Kissimmee River Restoration Project. So the Kissimmee River Restoration Project was designed in order to help store some of that rainfall north of the lake in the natural floodplain. Whoops. This is the restored area of the Kissimmee River before all the rainfall. So this is the channel that we filled in and recreated all the oxbows in the Kissimmee River. That has an effect on water quality as well as the timing of the flows going into Lake Okeechobee. We don't have enough data yet to really define the exact impacts in terms of timing, so I can't give that information to you, but anecdotally, we're seeing improved flows, so it's slowing it down. And we're seeing more than 3-fold increase of native fish species, 5-fold increase in wading bird activity, both nesting, foraging, and just populations going through this area since the restoration. It's not quite complete yet, but what we saw in Hurricane Irma, 2-mile wide floodplain, and all of that rain that was falling north of Lake Okeechobee was captured in that floodplain, and it sat there for weeks. That's what it's supposed to do. That's a great story. So we're really happy to see the projects that we are building and completing working. I wanted to give you an update. We talked about the Herbert Hoover dike. This is what's going on with that. I won't read the slide to you, but the project is working and the construction is ongoing. There's commitment from both the state and the federal government to expedite this project and to complete it by 2022. But what I want to share with you, here's some pictures. Everybody likes pictures. This is what these look like. So these are culverts. You know, we talked about culverts on Herbert Hoover dike, and I always think people think about those things that are underneath your driveway. These are massive. So these culverts, like this one, has 3 barrels, 3 openings, 3 pipes through. Each of these culverts have 2 or 3 of these. These are more than 10 foot in diameter. These are big, with a lot of water that goes through. Here's another one, 3 openings, each of those. Concrete tunnel with a steel liner inside. That steel liner is more than 10 feet in diameter. So really massive structures that move a lot of water. Here's our schedule. This is the expedited schedule. Everybody asks us, how quickly can we finish the dike? Can you get it done any faster? How about with full funding? This is our best case scenario. There's a lot of dependencies, and construction takes some time to build those kind of structures safely. So this is the best case scenario. I have to provide our disclaimer on this because we don't have out-year funding yet defined. So the federal government works on a 2-year funding cycle. So we have the FY19, fiscal year 19 president's budget. We have funding for 19 in accordance with this schedule. What we don't have is we don't have funding yet for years 20, 21, and 22. Assuming that we get all of the funding that we request, this is what that schedule could look like. What are roadblocks to that? We don't get all the funding. That's one roadblock. We don't get the funding on time. So if we get a continuing resolution and we don't get all of the funding early enough in the year, some of these contract awards could potentially be delayed, delaying that schedule. We have multiple hurricanes that slow down construction. Something like that could impact the schedule. Any kind of litigation, any kind of permitting problems, coordination with landowners for rights of way, things like that. That could impact the schedule. We are working really hard to remove all of those roadblocks, and there are many people in this room that are helping the Corps and the state to help remove some of those roadblocks, and we appreciate the support as we work for you and with you in order to expedite this construction. So the rest of the solution to the algae problem. We've got to get the water right. And it's going to take a lot of projects and a lot of working together. This is the plan. This will get us there. Will it stop all of the discharges to the estuaries? No, it won't. Because when we have really big events, when we have hurricane events, when we have Mays like this past May, where we had almost 12 inches of rain average over the area, and the last record was in 1895 with just under 9.5 inches of rain. Those kind of events, we're still going to have to make discharges to the estuaries. That's what we anticipate even with all of these projects. But the difference is, with all of these projects, the water quality will be better. The number of times that discharges will occur will be greatly reduced. And the length of those discharges, so how many days or weeks they would occur, will be greatly reduced. Which means that the estuary will be in better condition most of the time and can bounce back more quickly from a discharge event due to significant catastrophic weather events. So I wanted to give you an update on just one or two projects. So the Indian River Lagoon South project is right here in your backyard. It has multiple components and includes a very large storage reservoir and a couple of smaller storage reservoirs. Many of you may be aware that the C-23 and C-24 reservoirs were not included in the President's budget. I'm happy to let you know they were included in work plan money that we received from Congress, so we will be able to continue moving forward with this. Another good news about the C-44 reservoir project, we're still a couple of years away from completion of the reservoir. That's the bad news. The good news is that we are getting very close with the completion of the stormwater treatment area that the South Florida Water Management District is doing the construction on. When they complete that STA, they plan to use it using some temporary pumps that we are working with permitting with them so that we can use at least the stormwater treatment portion of this project earlier than completion of the entire project. So that will bring some small but significant incremental benefits of this project earlier than the final completion date. So that's another good news. Here are just some pictures of the C-44 project. If you haven't been out that way, I'd encourage you to just drive past that project site. This is a massive area. It gives you an understanding of the scale of these projects. The C-44 site itself, when you stand in the middle of the C-44 site, the project area is basically as far as the eye can see. When you're standing in the middle of it, it's from almost the horizon to almost the horizon on the other side. And so the scale needed in order to effectively store and treat the amounts of water that we have in this system is immense. And it really gives you an idea of the scale required and why all of these projects are so significant and requires so many hurdles to overcome, in terms of land acquisition, construction, permitting, all of those things. But we're working together in order to get there. So I'm ready to take questions.
We really appreciate that. I know that we can really get some updates and things going on. So we're going to take a few questions. We've got some time. Keep them specific to directed, and then we'll go from there and I'll recognize. So first Kenny, then we'll come up here, Sherry, and we'll go about it.
We went to DC this week, and we heard different politicians talking about changing the lure schedule, possibly raising the height of the lake. I would like to see the lake be lowered going into the dry season. I think when we keep it at 15, we're setting up for disaster every spring, fall, whatever, when we get a rain event. If we got it down to 12 going into the dry season, I think we could really make a difference with the Army Corps and the South Florida Water Management District to be able to talk about that and possibly lowering it. We're protecting agriculture, not communities, with storing that much water.
So, yeah, great question about the lower schedule. So the different components of the system are managed according to an operations schedule. We put the operations schedule together as part of a very public process. We're currently working on the south end of the system, which is called POP. So that's our combined operations schedule for the south end of the system, and we're going through that process right now. We have moved some money around, and we are going to start the planning for the lower schedule later at the very end of this fiscal year and into FY19. We anticipate that that will take us some time. I have some schedule information from my team about what that looks like. I'm hesitant to share too much at this time because we haven't completely vetted it. But the reason it's partly complicated is because we are fixing the dike in order to operate the dike under the current schedule. That's how our dam safety works, because we can't anticipate what we might do and construct to that. We have to have some knowns. And so what we assumed when we created the plan to fix the dike was the current operating schedule. At the end of the construction, we will do another dam safety analysis, and that will help inform what adjustments could be made, not will be made, but could be made to the schedule and give us the brackets. So that's just on the dam safety side. And then importantly, on the environmental side, what's best for the ecology of the lake, and we're continuing to collect data to help inform that. And so those processes will merge together along with a lot of information from the Water Management District and authorized users about